Good afternoon or good evening, depending where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Friday, February the 4th, 2022. Well, yesterday was COVID free Thursday, but Friday, today, is going to be chock full of COVID. The trucks are still in Ottawa, not all of them, but a lot of them. They're having street parties and playing street hockey and reducing Canada's elite to tears of rage. That's what's happening. So, what's it like living in Canada? I suppose, particularly if one is an older Canadian. Well, it's as if one woke up one day to find that you were living in an occupied country, because that's what Canada feels like now. And this didn't happen all at once, of course. It's been ongoing pretty much since Lester Pearson became Prime Minister of Canada in 1963. In very short order, the flag was replaced with a generic item, and we had official biculturalism and then official multiculturalism, and our imperial weights and measures were replaced by a foreign system, the metric system, that no one understood. And we were told that our history was boring, and now we've been told for quite some time that our history is evil. This has been driven to a very large extent by the media, as Tinksorg, the essay I read from him yesterday in Unheard, explained. The media is, well, let's say, it's not just the laptop class. Much of it is now, how shall I put it, Antifa adjacent. I have heard testimonies from people who said that they were present on the Hill in Ottawa, or they made a visit and then they watched the coverage in the media and they were furious because this is not what they saw. But to give you an idea of just how bizarre Canada has become, here's a piece from, and it appeared on January 22nd. I was only alerted to it today, in the Montreal Gazette, which is part of Post Media, which is the major newspaper conglomerate in my country, ostensibly right wing. Right wing in Canada means, I don't know, your political opinions are adjacent to Joe Scarborough, say. This is from someone called Josh Freed. Florida feels like another planet compared with Quebec. I should point out that Florida is quite popular amongst Quebecers, particularly Francophone Quebecers. They spend winters there, a lot of them do. And more than a few Canadians actually end up retiring to Florida. Josh Freed begins, I have a confession to make. I recently fled Quebec for a week, a refugee from Legault's 2.0 curfew and confinement rules. A friend told me about an available condo in Florida. My wife and I made a last-second decision to briefly escape and work remotely. But the second we landed, it felt like we'd arrived on another planet. While Quebec is in full confinement mode, Florida is cowboy land, where you barely know COVID is happening, despite much higher new case and hospitalization rates than ours. Comparing any place in Canada, any province in Canada, to Florida is almost apples and oranges, because the population of Florida is on average considerably older and much fatter than Canadians. But never mind. Back to Freed. It's lunacy by Canadian standards, but an eye-opening experience. For starters, everyone's out and about, filling bars, restaurants, movies, gyms, and jam-packed sports arenas. Oh, dear. Oh, dear. I should point out that the number of cases and hospitalizations exploded in the province of Quebec after their vaccine mandate was instituted. But again, back to Freed. Stores and supermarkets don't require masks, but some cashiers and customers wear them, though often under their nose or chin, Florida style. It seems of a way of announcing, look, I'm masked when they're not. Restaurants are fully open and peeking into some. They're mobbed. Waiters can choose whether to wear masks, and at least half don't. In ever friendly America, some customers even shake hands with the waiters before leaving to say, thanks, I'll have some germs for dessert. It's easy to spot Canadians at restaurants as we're the ones properly masked and nervously sitting on the terrace, even in the rain. How Canadian can you get? You can see the difference in the media too. In Quebec, COVID totally dominates the news because there's almost nothing else happening. In Florida, it's the reverse. I checked the prestigious Miami Herald recently. On a day Florida had risen to more than 70,000 new cases, almost twice as many per capita as Quebec, much like their hospitalizations. Once again, cases mean nothing. And since this piece is written, again, number of COVID cases in Quebec has absolutely exploded. But the first mention of COVID anywhere in the paper was exactly 18 stories down, with the headline, Amid Omicron surge, hospitals are stretched thin. What can Florida lawmakers do? Ignore it, as always, I guess. Meanwhile, the 19th story was Florida COVID update, 71,742 new cases as hospital patients increase. Again, hospital patients always increase during the cold and flu season, but never mind that. Among the many stories played far higher up were Miami Marlins named managers for minor league affiliates, and microbial contamination and laxative can cause a life-threatening infection. But that still beats NBC TV's Florida website that day, which ran this story way ahead of COVID. Police officer kills dog in Miami-Dade after barking complaint. It's hard to make this stuff up. Meanwhile, in La Presse the same day, the top 6 stories were about COVID. By any measure, Florida life seems surreal, as if everyone's wearing blinders and trying not to notice a disease that has killed more than 63,000 Floridians. No, it hasn't, actually. When they finally sort out the of COVID and with COVID, that 63,000 will be cut in half, perhaps more. That's twice as many deaths as in all of Canada in a state with 2/3 our country's population. It's health madness. But there's a psychological upside since COVID doesn't dominate all life like here. We Montrealers live in a tense, depressing pandemic bubble, all COVID all the time, which is why many people avoid following the news. And Josh Freed wants to live in that tense, depressing pandemic bubble. In Florida, entire conversations happen without the C word being mentioned. Unless you bring it up, which of course I did. The eternal Canadian. I asked a group of 7 60-somethings I met at a restaurant terrace how they felt about Florida's non-existent pandemic rules. Every last one said they loved how Florida handles things. In the words of one woman, quote, our philosophy here is I look after myself and you look after yourself. If you want to wear a mask indoors, you should. If you don't want to go to a restaurant, you shouldn't, unquote. When I asked about our collective responsibility to protect others, she shrugged and said, that's just not how we think here. I mentioned Quebec's recent curfew, but they all just laughed, dismissing it as Canadian communism. It's a tale of two worlds. Like most Canadians, I still think collective safety trumps some individual rights, like the right to, leave your house. But I'd prefer something between the cowboy individualism of Florida and the heavy-handed paternalistic rules of Quebec during this fifth wave. Our curfew was lifted, but we still can't legally invite anyone to our home, while other Western countries and Canadian provinces allow from 5 to 20 guests. How very gracious of them. Britain, France, Spain, and other European countries are starting to live with Omicron like the seasonal flu and dropping many emergency measures. Ontario plans to do likewise. When, if ever, will Quebec? To fly home, we needed a COVID PCR test, almost impossible to come by in Montreal, with lineups hours long at most hospitals. Consequently, the Quebec government won't allow anyone but the very sick to take them, while travelers must go to private clinics and pay perhaps $200. Meanwhile, every Florida pharmacy does free PCR tests, even for traveling foreigners. It seems bizarre in a country with no universal Medicare, where people are often bankrupted by medical bills. And Josh Freed concludes, but when we went for our free test at a pharmacy, there were a dozen people waiting, all wearing masks, the only place I'd seen that all week. for the first time. It felt a bit like home. And this is from the Ottawa Citizen, another newspaper owned by Post Media, which is allegedly right wing. This one is called Geiger Bardswich. Is that nuclear? But did he hit you? The parallels between the Freedom Convoy, in scare quotes, and domestic violence. A refrain we're seeing from convoy participants and supporters is that this protest is nonviolent. That song and dance is all too familiar to the many women across the country who've experienced domestic abuse. Caitlin Geiger Bardswich. That is quite a mouthful. And who is this person? She is the Communications and Development Manager at Women's Shelters Canada in Ottawa. WC has just launched the More Than awareness campaign on the range of services shelters offer and the different types of domestic violence. If you or someone you know is experiencing abuse, help is available 24/7. She begins since Saturdays. Residents of downtown Ottawa have been under siege from a freedom convoy, scare quotes, of protesters who have been anything but peaceful. Yet a gaslighting refrain we're seeing from convoy participants, supporters of the convoy, and even some media is that this protest is non-violent. This song and dance is all too familiar to the many women across the country who have experienced or are currently experiencing domestic violence. It is a blatant dismissal of the various ways violence and control can manifest. Many people believe that so-called real domestic violence is physical or sexual, i.e., when the abuser is physically making contact with their body to do harm. Similarly, it seems that the convoy will only be declared violent when someone is physically hurt. But domestic violence, and frankly, any violence, is more than physical. Domestic violence is psychological torture, like the incessant honking and sleep deprivation residents of downtown Ottawa are currently experiencing. Domestic violence is verbal abuse, like the yelling, spitting, and racial slurs residents wearing masks are experiencing as they go about their day-to-day lives. Oh, we're interested in day-to-day lives, are we? And there's a link to this alleged abuse, pictures or video, or it didn't happen. Everyone in Canada has a smartphone now. You can take pictures, you can take videos. Where are these pictures and videos? Domestic violence is financial abuse, like the workers at the Rideau Center and other local businesses are experiencing as they go for days without a paycheck. Domestic violence is threats and harassment, like the defecating in front of homes with pride flags. Let's see the pics. Let's see the video. The racial and misogynistic slurs hurled at women and racialized people. Who racialized them, by the way? And the rocks thrown at paramedics. Domestic violence is about inducing fear, like the waving of Confederate flags. I believe there was one. Swastikas. I believe there was one swastika flag. And imagery of nooses aimed at the prime minister, which is racial somehow, because Justin Trudeau has dressed up in blackface so many times that he's an honorary black, I suppose. Domestic violence is gaslighting, like the arguments that this protest is about freedom, while simultaneously imprisoning residents of downtown Ottawa in their homes. Domestic violence is about coercive control, like the residents with disabilities who can no longer access paratransport or safely get groceries. Like the actions of the convoy protesters, domestic violence is often dismissed by members of the general public and the police alike. Oh, really? Is it? We often hear the, well, what was she wearing refrain regarding victims of sexual or physical assault. Oh, we do. Do we? The recent reports of police telling people not to wear masks to avoid harassment is an unsubtle analogy to this type of victim blaming. And it goes on and on. Caitlin Geiger Bardswich concludes, it is time for all of us to say enough is enough. Enough of the law-breaking campaign of terror in downtown Ottawa. Enough of the domestic violence and femicides. What? Enough of the culture that breeds both phenomena. Let's go to the chat. Hello to Emma Kelly's Earth, Zen Master Football Analysis, and William Hicks. Respectable commenting name. Remember, the honking will continue until morale improves. Indeed. Changing to a new device ages you at least 10 years. So Jokin666. Hello to Dan. Uh, William Hicks, Ottawa's truck sector. Will they call it the Chaz or by some other exotic name? Yes. Yes, a SoundCloud warlord took over a chunk of Seattle for several weeks and was applauded by the mayor and city council and by the governor. And it became, as someone pointed out on Twitter yesterday, a narco tyranny almost instantly, with many rapes and murders. But never mind that. Hello to Dr. Deadname, Dionysus. Hey, KMG, he says you should talk about Bach's musical offering and Frederick the Great is pretty funny. I'll look into that. Hello to Head McNeck. Hello to William Hicks. It's the 10-4 Good Buddy Collective. He says, what's your 20, Ottawa? Hello, who else do we have here? Hello to Urban Planner. I just saw a story about the U.S. moving upgraded GPS-guided nuclear bombs to Italy and other NATO countries this year. Does Russia keep nuclear weapons in client states? Dr. Deadname replies, the U.S. is the only country that deploys nuclear weapons outside of its territory, not counting naval vessels. Oscar Toe says, David French fights for my rights. Certainly your rights to expose your children to Drag Queen Story Hour, or rather to have your children exposed to Drag Queen Story Hour. Hello to Dan. I will have more on GoFundMe and the protest in a minute. Hopper says, sometimes I get the impression that Kevin isn't fond of mainstream reporting. That's very astute of you. British American says, this a trucker rebellion reminds me that the typically supposed Canadian versus American difference is so misleading. The real dichotomy is country city, the country Canucks versus Yanks versus city Canucks Yanks. David Wright says, when are people going to finally learn that you cannot use GoFundMe? Too many restrictions and surprises. Head McNeck says, what was the guy who had the GoFundMe going to do with all the money? It's not like he was driving around paying for people's diesel fuel. Seemed pretty sketchy from the start. Who else do we have here? Dan writes, from my understanding, the organizers had a plan to help pay for food, diesel, etc. for truckers, and the remaining amount would go to a veterans charity. David Rice says, most people aren't aware of the woke thievery by GoFundMe. Don't be too sure they won't do well. Head McNeck says, to be fair, there was one swastika flag at Charlottesville, and Kevin say that there were dozens on Grace and Steel. It happens, apparently. And hello to My Trail of Disgrace. Yes, who gives us the noise made by the woke, well, all elite people in Ottawa and Canada today, which is Ree! And it was a summer of love, said Dan Allison. That's pretty much what the mayor of Seattle said about Chaz Chop. What inane object would our current regime use for a new flag? What would be our maple leaf? A pet rock, perhaps? And let's back to it. The pundits are out in force. But the new Canadian, the leader of the Canadian Conservative Party, all these pundits, almost without exception, hate the Conservative Party of Canada, as lame as it is. But now they're all wallowing in this strange new respect for Aaron O'Toole. Oh, he talked about taking Canada back, and that's just like Trump, and he's a very bad man. But then, he embraced the Poppers campaign of Michelle Rempel Garner and demanded that the Liberal government force the Canadian Blood Service to allow homosexuals to donate blood at any time with no conditions. Yeah, how did that work out for him? I'm going to be writing a piece for VDARE over the weekend on the defenestration of Aaron O'Toole. It strikes me that perhaps some of the objection to him was that under his leadership, the gay mafia within the Conservative Party of Canada pretty much solidified control. Potential federal leadership contenders' phones are already ringing, says Catherine Levesque at the National Post. And Brampton Mayor Patrick Brown has been busy making calls, according to two Conservative sources who spoke to the National Post on Thursday. Brown is well connected with cultural communities and could easily garner support should he decide to run. I suspect cultural communities is a reference to, well, minorities, particularly Sikhs. And once again, it is Sikhs, the Sikh vote, that determines who wins pretty much every major leadership campaign in my country, both federal and provincial. Brown has also been a fierce advocate against Quebec's secularism law, known as Bill 21, a position that could appeal to certain conservatives who've been asking the party to take a tougher stance against this law that prohibits religious symbols in certain fields of work. Much eliminate the Conservative Party presence in the province of Quebec. Those people who are against Bill 21, they're going to vote for the NDP or the Liberals. But never mind that. Whenever I see pictures, oh yeah, Mayor of Brampton. He was from Barrie. Well, he was from Toronto, and then he moved to Barrie and was elected to city council at 22, and then elected an MP. And so then the very strange situation, he is ousted as leader of the Progressive Conservative Party of Ontario, really close to an upcoming election. Nobody really knows why. It's a secret. But whenever I see a picture or video of Patrick Brown, I always find myself thinking, has anyone checked his freezer for body parts? Oh, and Campbell Clark has declared the race over already. It looks like no conservative will be able to challenge Pierre Poilievre. Yeah, it's all over but the shouting. He's a standard bearer of the populist right of the party, promising to fight for those folks, and now they are calling his name. If he turns them down now, he will be turning down his shot at becoming prime minister. So the big question is whether there's anyone else who will mount a serious challenge to Poilievre, and the answer appears to be no. Yeah, okay. What about the left of the Conservative Party? Ronald Lee Ambrose can enter the race, or Michel Rempel. If Leslyn Lewis runs, then, that's going to split the vote with Pierre Poilievre. It's all up in the air right now. But again, Campbell Clark doesn't seem to realize, once again, that it is Sikhs, the Sikh vote, an instant Sikh army of mostly fake, phantom, dead, or living in India people who determine who gets to be conservative leader. But we don't want to mention that. Robin Urbach at the Globe and Mail, the Conservatives need an affable, relatable new leader with more than a right-wing one, because Stephen Harper, who was the first Conservative Prime Minister since Brian Mulroney, he was so very affable. No, I'm joking here. Stephen Harper is the very opposite of affable. He is standoffish to the extreme and exudes intellectual arrogance, but he still managed to win. We're back down to who'd you rather have a beer with, eh? She writes, the Conservative Party's impulse will be to veer right now that caucus has rid itself of its little experiment with centrism. Oh, with Aaron O'Toole out of the top job he likely takes within the last affirmative mention of carbon taxes that will waft through the office of the Leader of the Opposition for some time, along with some of the most progressive positions on social issues that a Conservative leader in this country has ever held. And how did that work for him? It was politically smart, for example, to try to appeal to unionized blue-collar workers, even if the approach wasn't traditionally conservative. No, but it is conservative, actually. Pulling the party away from the center-right, my ass, back to a more comfortable right flank position may only make it harder for the Conservatives to achieve what all of this angst is ultimately about. Yes, someone who cannot bear conservatism, the right, is giving a lecture to what passes for the institutional right-wing party in Canada. What both leaders suffered from, that would be Andrew Scheer and Aaron O'Toole, was a distinct lack of authenticity. as well as a crippling inability to connect with voters on a basic human level. No, I'm sorry. Once again, a great number of people are saying, "Oh, yes, we have to go back to Stephen Harper days." He did not connect with voters on a basic human level at all. Not at all. And oh yes, Pierre Poilievre making his 12th joke about the prime minister wearing blackface. Oh, not realizing that much of the rest of the country simply hears a partisan Poindexter trying to make his pals laugh. You see, because when Justin Trudeau did all those things, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. It doesn't matter at all. The fact that the news media sat on this information for years and years and years and years, and it only came up because of a leak before the 2019 election. Yeah, don't look into that. Don't look into that at all, because the Canadian news media, almost without exception, went into a psychosexual frenzy at the advent of Justin Trudeau. Not just the women, but the men as well. Jen, not Jennifer, but Jen Gerson, writes in Maclean's, the Conservative Party's identity crisis post O'Toole. There's room for a Tory opposition that makes a sensible critique of COVID restrictions and no sign this party is ready to fill it. Well, it looks like the Conservative caucus has decided to do the stupid thing. I will remind people, maybe you don't know this, that the 2015, I believe 2015 election in Alberta, which elected the first NDP government in Alberta's history, Jen Gerson wrote one of those lazy stories that so many reporters indulge in. Well, just this question of how much of a huge majority the progressive Conservatives are going to have. Well, you see, as Chris Berman used to say on ESPN, that's why they play the game. To insult one's readers by saying, "Oh, this is so boring. I don't even know why I bother," because we all know who's going to win. No, we don't know who's going to win. But back to Jen. Shortly after the election, I wrote here at Maclean's that dumping leader Erin O'Toole will be short-sighted, regardless of how angry anyone was over the disappointing results or their leader's performance. Very few nail it on their first time out, and there were plenty of indicators suggesting O'Toole's moderate conservatism did in fact make inroads on the crucial 905 region. Yes, moderate conservatism, like being in favor of the sexual mutilation of children and supporting a bill which passed after a craven decision not to allow a recorded vote on it that makes counseling against the sexual mutilation of children a criminal offense subject to up to 5 years imprisonment. I suppose that's what moderate conservatism means in Canada. Alas, after the trucker convoy pulled into Ottawa, drawing support from Conservative MPs in a meeting with O'Toole himself, a substantive majority of the Conservative caucus decided that my argument wasn't compelling enough. Yes, my argument wasn't compelling enough. Jen, not Jennifer, but Jen Gerson has just summed up her entire pundit career in 5 words. Kudos. And so they decided to oust him at the moment of maximum chaos, when a manifestation of inchoate anger at long-running and sometimes illogical COVID restrictions has descended on the Capitol, along with a handful of Confederate flag and swastika-waving extremists. Great timing, everyone. Yeah. You notice that when they have one of these pro-Palestinian marches in Canada, or BDS marches or whatever, there's a lot of people holding signs and shouting, sometimes in Arabic, "Death to Israel." But the media is very, very wary of mentioning that or showing pictures, because that might be construed as Islamophobia. Yeah, full-blown crisis of identity, and none of the incentives bend toward moderation. Yeah, well, they tried that twice. And how did it work? Didn't work at all. But let's do it again, because we don't want to make Jen Gerson feel bad. No, we don't. We don't want to do that, because it is the duty of politicians in my country to please the media. I'm sure Jen Gerson has no understanding just how hated the media and distrusted the media is in Canada. And I suppose if she knew, she wouldn't care. But here, TVO, which is the print outlet or the internet outlet of TV Ontario, which is government owned and controlled, Matt Gurney of the National Post, anything to end the insanity. A Tory insider on O'Toole's ouster. A member of the former leader's inner circle on conversion therapy. What? His inner circle on conversion therapy. Oh, the convoy and what comes next for the Conservatives. Yes, this brave, brave person calling for sanity in the Conservative Party is not willing to give his name. I don't know what this person is so upset about. I'm sure he will find gainful employment in the PR spiv sector soon enough. And this fellow seems near hysteria that, oh my God, something about conversion therapy, which is very mainstream opinion, very mainstream. Oh yes, here's one example, says this insider. We had unanimous consent on the motion to ban conversion therapy, and that was a big win for us. It was a big win for Canadians. And sometimes big wins like that have big costs. I don't think it's all about the conversion therapy. I'm not saying that, but that's an example. Aaron wanted to move the party places. Some people within it didn't want to go. And every time we won a battle like that, well, we push a few more people over to the group that wanted him gone. Yes. The public has a long memory. We haven't recovered from the barbaric cultural practices hotline. Well, Canadians are not in favor of barbaric practices, but as I like to point out, barbaric practices come from barbaric countries. And of course, the conservative position on immigration is we fully believe in the great replacement so long as this is done legally and just a little slower than the liberals. Oh, yes, we're going to carry on about the housing crisis in Canada, that middle class people are being priced out of owning houses, but we're not going to mention immigration because we might be called xenophobic. Andrew McDougall, a PR spiv, who was a chief advisor to Stephen Harper. Dear Conservatives, grow up. After 7 long years in the post-Harper wilderness, it's time for Conservatives to end the flame wars and finally get serious about their future. Andrew McDougall is furious at what has happened and what is happening. He's absolutely furious. He is beside himself. And he tweeted, introducing this, that he felt the need to swear. That's how furious Andrew McDougall is. The desire to tweak the noses of their betters is behind the conservative embrace of the trucker convoy. Here, advocates and enthus are people with enough sack to say F this to everything happening around them. The vast majority of truckers are vaccinated. Yeah, apparently 90%. Why would that be? Because, well, they've been demonized. They've been told if they're not double vaxxed and presumably soon enough triple vaxxed, they will lose their jobs. They will go bankrupt. And of course, they will be exiled from much of civil activity. Yeah. Why do you think these 90% got vaccinated? But no, he is still carrying, Andrew McDougall is still carrying the torch for vaccinations. They are ever so safe and efficacious, and only a lunatic would believe otherwise. Modern conservatism is all about attitude these days, not worldview. Yeah, well, it is for PR spivs, isn't it? Oh yes, we have to go back to the days of Jason Kenney as the minister for Curry in a hurry, sucking up to minorities. Hey, what do you want, minorities? We'll give it to you. Hey, do you have anything else that Canada needs to apologize for? Because we will apologize. We will grovel. You just ask us how low. I'll say this. I don't believe the Conservative Party of Canada can ever win election as currently constituted. That it either becomes a populist party or it dies. But back to McDougall, the party should be robust about its pride in Canada and clear about its view that our country is neither a genocidal state, oh, very gracious, nor institutionally racist. But it must also come to the discussion with enough humility to acknowledge that some communities are struggling to plug into the opportunity many of us taken for granted. Oh, race-based barriers still exist. Oh, push off. Just push off. What race-based barriers? Non-white people in Canada get statutory privileges. Here's some sanity from Terence Corcoran at the Financial Post. Tories need new winds of change. Maybe it's time to divide the right. In the spring of 1996, a pair of neoconservatives, David Frum and Ezra Levant, helped stage a Winds of Change conference in Calgary, their objective being to fan and flutter the ideological and political wings of the so-called right side of the Canadian political spectrum. Preston Manning's Reform Party of Canada and the Progressive Conservative Party of Canada. The two parties, it was argued, could never win power so long as they split the vote against the ruling Liberals. The conference moved to merge Canada's divided Conservatives into a single unified party. The mood was upbeat. Quote, "The political left is dead in English Canada," unquote, declared David Frum in a Financial Post column. David Frum, has that man ever been right about anything in his career? Anything? Yes, what happened was that the reform, well, I suppose this is ancient history, having happened in the 1990s. After the failure of the Reform Party to break into Ontario, polling was done by the party, and people were asked, is it because it's a Western party that you're not going to vote for it? And the answer was no. Is it because social conservatives, Christians, or whatever? The answer was no. Well, why aren't you going to vote for it? Preston Manning. So Manning decided to euthanize the Reform Party to save his own skin. And he created something called the Canadian Alliance. It didn't work. And then that was merged into, became one Conservative Party. They dropped the Progressive. Preston Manning, he was out as leader, nonetheless. Terence Corcoran continues, as we know, in the wake of the removal of Erin O'Toole as leader of the Conservatives in Ottawa, the Canadian right is no more united today than it was in the early 1990s. The winds may have blown the Conservatives into power, thanks in great part to the stature of Harper, but they never changed the policy direction in Ottawa, nor did they ever clearly articulate or impose the promised plan to, as we might put it today, scale back the state. In politics, it's less important how good you are than how bad the other guy is. And Stephen Harper had the great luck in running against, one weak Canadian leader, Paul Martin, and then two disastrous Liberal Party leaders, Stéphane Dion and that fellow whose name escapes me, who spent most of his life not in Canada. And right after he lost the election to Stephen Harper, he fled Canada once again in order to work for a George Soros institution in Hungary. Yeah. Marcel Masse, a former member of the Reform Party who ran for election in the Montreal riding of Papineau-Saint-Michel in 1996, his position was that the Reform merger with the Conservatives had been a big mistake. Quote, "Canada would be a much more livable, prosperous, and less dysfunctional country today if the Reform Party had continued its ascent, managed to break into the east of the country, and come to power without watering down its program." Here. But no, people like Andrew Coyne said, no, you're not allowed to have, definite opinions in this country, because that would be extremist. The Liberal Party has become, extremist. There is no other way to describe it. But it's, Stockholm Syndrome or the whipped dog syndrome. And, oh, no, they're Nazis. Yep, they're Nazis. And here's Glenn McGregor of CTV News, and he's going to prove it. Interim Conservative leader Candice Bergen pushed predecessor Erin O'Toole to show support for the Freedom Convoy protest, arguing last week there are good people on both sides, an echo of the phrase made infamous by former U.S. President Donald Trump after Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia in 2017. Bergen also told O'Toole and other members of the Conservative shadow cabinet that there were reasonable people at the truckers' protest, just as there were in the violent attack on the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021. Well, it appears that this canard about what Trump said cannot be blown up often enough. He did not call David Duke and that lot good people. No, he did not. And you can find the words easily enough. There is a transcript which is available at, well, CTV News, actually. Trump, you're against Nazis, are you? Yes, I'm against Nazis. You're against the KKK? Yes, I'm against the KKK because Trump is not insane. But no, yeah, now this is come back to Canada, and Candice Bergen is a Nazi because she said they're good people at the truckers' protest. Yeah, well, there are. They are overwhelmingly good people, and once again, I am surprised that there have been so few nutcases and obviously so few feds that have shown up there. And, oh, no, wait. We have some breaking news here. This is from complex.com. The Parliamentary Black Caucus, the group made up of parliamentarians from Canada's Senate and House of Commons, has released a statement on the ongoing Freedom Convoy protest in Ottawa, stating the event is an opportunity for white supremacists to parade their views in public. Quote, some protesters brought symbols such as the swastika or the Confederate flag onto Parliament Hill and into neighborhoods in the National Capital Region, reached the February 4th news release. Indigenous culture was characterized and appropriated. Monuments to Canadian heroes were desecrated, and businesses, employees, and volunteers were harassed and humiliated. The caucus is demanding an investigation of the convoy by Parliament, including how the police and intelligence services responded to the situation. So I had never heard of this Black Parliamentary Caucus before. They don't seem to have any web presence, and I wasted about 10 minutes looking for it. But here's a statement, which is somehow under the banner of the Government of Canada. Statement by the Parliamentary Black Caucus. And this is from, 2010. The Parliamentary Black Caucus, established in 2015, is composed of parliamentarians from the Senate and the House of Commons, okay, who are either Black Canadians, okay, or allies of Black Canadians. In other words, you don't even have enough members for a proper caucus. We meet regularly to bring forward, discuss, and advocate issues that are of importance to Black communities across Canada. It is only fitting that this caucus was formed during the United Nations Decade of People of African Descent. Several brutal acts of racism caught on video came to light in the past few weeks for everyone to witness. They represent an only very thin slice of the racism that Black Canadians experience in their daily lives. From daily microaggressions to the rarer but tragically fatal hate-filled acts. Such a horrible, horrible place. Oh, and here are the demands. 1, measure the pervasiveness of systemic discrimination through the collection of race-based data. 2, assist Black Canadians, providing economic prosperity to all through measures to support Black-owned run businesses, GIBs. 3, eliminate the barriers to access to justice. Oh, shut up. And public security for Black Canadians and Indigenous people. 4, make our public administration more effective and resilient by ensuring it actually reflects the diversity of the public it serves. There are quota systems in all federally regulated institutions. They don't know about that. 5, recognize and support the artistic and economic contributions of Black Canadian culture and heritage. And Ottawa has a Black police chief who was born in Jamaica for some reason. There are so many police chiefs in North America who are Black and female. I just have to assume that they were chosen on the basis of Well, if we have a black man in charge of the police, they can't claim that it's racist. Well, they do, because black police are effectively white. That's the argument. But if we have a black female police chief, yeah, that doesn't work either. It's from Kane at Citizen Free Press. The Ottawa Police Service issued a statement Thursday saying, we respect the rights of our residents and community members to speak out when they see injustices, and we understand the community's deep pain and frustration. Our role is to provide a safe space for people to grieve and be heard. What? Yes, that's what the Ottawa Police Chief said about the BLM riots. Yeah. But now the police chief is saying the department will investigate and prosecute any officer who provides support to the Freedom Convoy, including giving the truckers food and water. And this is from Elizabeth Thompson of the CBC. A parliamentary committee has voted unanimously to call officials from the popular crowdfunding site GoFundMe to answer questions about a fundraiser that has collected more than $10.1 million to support the anti-vaccine mandate protests in Ottawa. The motion, proposed by NDP MP Alistair McGregor, calls on company officials to appear before the House of Commons Committee on Public Safety and National Security, as soon as possible. Liberal, Conservative, and Bloc Québécois members of the committee joined McGregor in voting to invite the company to testify. The committee wants the company to answer questions about measures in place to, quote, ensure the funds are not being used to promote extremism, white supremacy, anti-Semitism, and other forms of hate, which have been expressed among prominent organizers for the truck convoy currently in Ottawa, unquote. Oh, do you have any examples of this? An amendment proposed by Liberal MP Talim Noor Mohammed calls on officials from the Financial Transactions and Reports Analysis Centre of Canada, Canada's money laundering and terrorist financing watchdog, to also appear before the committee. Oh no, apparently there is American money going to the truckers. Oh, why? You ever heard about Tides? Why don't you look into Tides, one of the leading and most powerful environmental organizations in Canada, and all their money seems to come from the United States. But American money, boo! George Soros money, yay! They're such clowns. The media in my country are just such clowns. Well, it would be bad enough that they're clowns, but of course they're malicious clowns. From Mike Crowley at CBC News, vaccine mandate protesters are headed to Ontario legislature. What that means for Premier Doug Ford. He is not happy about this. Not happy at all. We have a bunch of yahoos out in front of Queen's Park sitting there protesting. Okay. That was the anti-lockdown pandemic. Doug Ford is really in no condition or situation to call anyone else a yahoo. Let's go back to the chat. I'm still reeling, after from the effects of the intervention by the Canadian Parliamentary Black Caucus. I mean, they speak with such authority, all 7 of them, or whatever. Dan says GoFundMe canceled the fundraiser for the convoy and will keep the remaining $9 million to give to charities of their choosing unless people request refunds before the 19th. That seems illegal, says Oscar Tao. Companies like GoFundMe can do whatever they like. It's against our terms of service. How? Because it's against our terms of service. Well, how? Because we say so. Can you be specific? We don't have to be specific. Apparently there's neo-Nazis involved, so that's enough. Who else do we have here? Okay, we could do worse than Poilievre, says British American. Do the Sikhs love that fine Canadian climate? Well, most of them in Canada are in British Columbia, which is in the lower mainland of British Columbia, which is considerably better weather than most of Canada. Trudeau is, along with Macron, one of Klaus Schwab's favorite students, one notices in his comments. Yeah, Michel Rempel is another one of the people trained, young leaders trained by the WEF. If Bernier would just drop the republicanism, he'd be my choice for God Emperor, says British American. You know, Bernier had a tremendous rise in popularity with his attacks on multiculturalism gone too far and the denigration of Canadian history and traditions. The libertarian half of him, there is no support for that in Canada at all. What in the hell is a partisan Poindexter? Asked Oscar Toe. I don't know. Someone who has political opinions and wears glasses, perhaps? British American says, Poilievre's managing to get himself elected in the middle of very liberal indeed. Ottawa is a very impressive feat indeed. I don't know why those not on the left even bother disavowing the Nazi and rebel flags. It has never mattered and will never matter to those people, says Oscar Toe. Metal Mike says Doug Ford continues to spit on the truckers. He will not be re-elected. Hello to Tom Anderson and David the Gnome. British American says, yes, Ford's taken the ticket. He's been either bought off or blackmailed. Michael Ignatieff. Yeah, that was the name of the fellow who dropped into Canada to become its leader. And then it's a funny thing because I knew of Michael Ignatieff because he was a BBC darling. Michael Ignatieff was pretty much unknown in Canada, but he was well known in Britain. They always double down, says Zen Master Football Analysis. Indeed. Since when do these people care about monuments, says Dr. Deadname? No, they don't. Of course not. Is the black police chief black presenting, says David the Gnome. And Christopher Lasch book review coming up. Don't touch that mouse, says Hauper. Novak Djokovic announced he will get fully vaccinated so he can play tennis this year, says Metal Mike. Well, I'm sorry to hear that. Metal Mike says, I wonder if a Serbian hospital will fake his vax status. Yeah, I suppose that's a possibility. Dr. Deadname says, those truckers started an impromptu ice hockey game in the street. Sheer terror, I tell you. Beast Mode Boomer, a name new to me, hello, says, Mr. Grace, have you talked about the NFT craze yet on your show? Funny you should say that, because I'm going to be talking about that shortly. And what? Hang on. My browser just did something strange there, but I'm back to normal now. Oh, yeah, it's a pandemic of the unvaccinated. Right. I'm just going to keep reading these numbers, okay? I'm just going to keep reading these numbers for as long as they give them to us, just to demonstrate that this is not true. It's not true at all. And of the 4,047 cases detected, this is in Ontario, detected by PCR tests on Friday, 170 involved partially vaccinated people, 365 involved people with unknown vaccination status, 685 involved unvaccinated people, and 2,827 involved people with at least 2 doses. But you got to get those vaccines, got to get the booster because it's safe and efficacious. And, let's see, in hospital, but not the ICU. In Ontario, unvaccinated cases, 522, fully vaxxed, 1332. In ICU, unvaccinated, 161, fully vaccinated cases, 179. But, yes, what does it mean that you have COVID? What does that mean? This is from Harley Sims at True North or TNC.news. Despite continuing reports of record COVID-19 cases and hospital numbers, British Columbia data now shows that half of the province's COVID hospitalizations since December 1st were not people admitted because of COVID, but people who incidentally tested positive for the virus after being admitted for other reasons. So it's not COVID that's driving them to hospital, Provincial Health Officer Bonnie Henry said at a briefing Tuesday. Data released Tuesday by the BC Centre for Disease Control shows that during December and January, more than 40% of patients who tested positive for COVID-19, including 60% of Omicron cases, came to hospital for other reasons than COVID and had, quote, no or mild respiratory symptoms or other symptoms of COVID-19, unquote. And I wonder just how many of those people were infected whilst in hospital. The statistics from Britain in that regard are pretty horrifying, and I suspect it's not all that different in Ontario or British Columbia. This is from the post-millennial Angelo Isidoro. The United Conservative Party government of Alberta is planning on lifting its COVID restrictions, beginning with the elimination of the vaccine passport. Yes. According to CTV, Alberta's Premier Jason Kenney expects to relax COVID-19 restrictions in February. But the Globe and Mail had a powerful editorial from the editorial board on January 29th. Vaccines are our most powerful pandemic fighting tool. Yes, they're silver bullets. Oh, man. Keep on drinking the Kool-Aid, Globe and Mail editorial board. Rather revolting piece in the Daily Mail. You know, you see all those stories about starlets, that you'd never heard of. Oh, here's what they're wearing. Oh, here they are walking on the street with their kid or kids. Why are they there? I just have to assume that they pay for these stories. But setting the record straight on COVID booster jabs, we asked the experts to answer your questions, sponsored by the UK government. Despite millions of us having had our third vaccination, some people are still hesitant. We asked the experts to address their main concerns. And here's a bunch of people showing that they got the jab. And there's one white person out of 6. Yeah, one white person out of 6. The whole purpose of this gaslighting is to persuade people that the great replacement has already happened, and that white people should just hurry up and die. Oh, GP Dr. Farzana Hussain, Professor Mahendra G. Patel. These are people highlighted here. Oh, look, a white person. Oh, look, another one. And then we get to GP Dr. Amir Khan. Yeah. 3 out of 5. 60%. This is not the demographics of Britain, but I suppose they are the ideal demographics. This is from the Times of Israel by Nathan Jeffe. Israeli study offers strongest proof yet of vitamin D's power to fight COVID. How about that? Researchers from Bar Ilan University and Galilee Medical Center say that the vitamin has such a strong impact on disease severity that they can predict how people would fare if infected based on nothing more than their ages and vitamin D levels. But who cares about that sort of thing? Joseph Wolfson at Fox News reports, there's been a full-on media blackout of the new study outlining the ineffectiveness of lockdowns to prevent COVID deaths. According to a Johns Hopkins University meta-analysis of several studies, lockdowns during the first COVID wave in the spring of 2020 only reduced COVID mortality by 0.2% in the US, in Europe. And as I will point out, that is statistical static. And the questions about excess deaths, cancer cases not being treated, people with heart disease not being treated. I wonder if that was included there. According to Grabian transcripts, CNN, MSNBC, ABC, CBS, and NBC all ignored the anti-lockdown findings. It wasn't just the networks, though. The New York Times, the Washington Post, the Associated Press, Reuters, USA Today, Axios, Politico, among other outlets, also turned a blind eye to the findings. Yes, the regime media, the laptop class. As we learned during the Bush administration, they construct their own reality. Remember that? Jim Kunstler writes this morning, reality is the kryptonite of the left, sapping its superpowers of coercion and persecution, which, get this, are the only abilities it cares about. The left only pretends to want to make the world a better place. It doesn't care about governing, managing national affairs, and it wouldn't know how, as no one has demonstrated better than Joe Biden and the shadowy wrecking crew running him behind the scenes. The left actually just seeks to punish its adversaries, and it generates ever new adversaries and animosities in its quest to lay on more punishments. The more sadistic, the better. thus the never-ending COVID-19 melodrama, which provides such an excellent excuse for torturing the populace. The left's motto, the beatings will continue until morale improves. Reality is intruding now, though, with the help of its twin sister, truth. Particular truths are emerging to fortify reality and weaken the left's efforts to beat down the peoples of Western Civ. For example, the implacable truth that the mRNA vaccines, let's say, are not particularly efficacious. I'll rewrite that a little. In face of this obvious reality, government and corporations persist in their irrational campaigns to vax up every last man, woman, and child. Why, at this point, despite all the free Kit Kat bars you could stuff down your craw, would any sane employee of the Hershey's chocolate empire opt for a vax? The ridiculous official answer, of course, is to protect the already vaccinated. Yeah, right. Ditto the unfortunate put upon citizens of Austria, such a tidy little country too, and so hopelessly lost in its days of mass formation psychosis. This week, Switzerland, Finland, Sweden, the UK, and Ireland are dropping all COVID-19 restrictions and impositions, while Austria makes its vax mandate a national law. How many Austrians are secretly studying Hungarian now? The cognitive dissonance must be unbearable, like a kind of 5G-induced tinnitus that afflicts an entire population, making them want to bang their heads against the wall. Likewise, the absurd government of Canada, led by the clueless ponce Justin Trudeau, who refuses to take his patent leather go-go boot off the neck of Canadian truckers. The truckers aren't having it anymore, of course, and neither are the towing services that the government is trying to enlist to get rid of the truckers' trucks. Meanwhile, the premiers of Saskatchewan and Alberta have thrown in the towel on COVID-19 restrictions, leaving Trudeau in his fortress of solitude, exact whereabouts unknown, desperately hurling objurgations at the, quote, racists, Islamophobes, and transphobes, unquote, seeking to end his career as a turbaned, cross-dressing, blackface, political entertainer. Why keep the kids in masks, given that serious illness from COVID-19 of any kind is near zero? For the pleasure of making them miserable and flaunting their power over the kids' parents. This is how the left rolls. Now, as a general proposition, you can bet that the reason the left wants to keep the COVID-19 scare going as long as possible is in order to keep in place the emergency mail-in voting allowances that so easily enable ballot harvesting and other election frauds. Alas, the timing on this doesn't look good for them. The rapid Omicron upspike has turned into a rapid downspike. The golden thing is vanishing in the winter mist. By early March, there may be no actual COVID on the scene. Oh my gosh, and then what? The midterms are yet months away, and if there's no emergency, well, I don't know. It's not beyond imagining the left and its mysterious sponsors out there in the mythical matrix of sinister global interests will send, and I'm not going to repeat that, but I guess you can figure it out. The financial scaffold of late modernity is giving way under the burden of rackets and Ponzi's it has been asked to support. This week, Facebook, aka Meta, scored the world record for biggest single-day market value drop ever, shedding $232 billion in capital losses. You go, Zuck. The everything bubble has achieved supernova scale, and everybody knows she's going to blow as soon as Jay Powell lifts the Fed funds rate 25 basis points. When that finally happens, things get realer than real, and truth comes marching in like the saints with bells on. It'll be the left's mask of the Red Death. Ashes, ashes, all fall down. And, oh, yeah. Here's a story from, oh, no, I talked about that story yesterday. Let's look at Steve Kirsch's Substack. UK government report reveals that British children 10 to 14 years old up to 52 times more likely to die after getting a COVID shot. This is from the Office of National Statistics. Steve's fact-based COVID-19 hub. I read in the media that Spotify has a fact-based COVID-19 hub, so I thought I'd create my own so you'd have a choice on which facts you want to believe. And you can find this at Steve Kirsch. His surname is spelled Kirsch, .substack.com. And let's take a look at the Substack of Eugipius. Oh, this is a good story. 59-year-old hyper-vaccinated corona hystericist driven insane by unvaccinated husband. Every day brings a new absurdity from Germany's dumbest newspaper, the Süddeutsche Zeitung. Today, we find this piece about some lunatic 59-year-old woman who left her husband of 23 years because he subscribes to various conspiracy theories, does not take corona seriously enough, and refuses to be vaccinated. So traumatized was she by her inability to persuade her husband to believe what she believes and to do what she does that she decided to found a self-help group for relatives of corona deniers, corona trivializers, and conspiracy theorists. With a little poking around on the benighted website of the Munich Self-Help Center, alas, there is such a thing, I found her group and its description. Since March 2020, corona has dominated the world and our minds. It's great if your partner and your family have the same views on this as you do, and you can support each other. If, however, you have different views of corona, there is great suffering. In addition to the normal corona anxiety, endless, draining discussions with no satisfying resolution. We need to have a talk equals endless, draining discussions with no satisfying resolution. This leads to a sense of powerlessness and in turn to alienation, denigration, anger, and in the worst case, separation. It's important to emphasize that partners, parents, children who deny or trivialize corona are conspiracy theorists. They see a plan behind all of this and subscribe to various conspiratorial myths. They aren't people who are only afraid of the side effects of vaccination. As a woman with a very differently thinking partner, I had a very fearful time with corona in 2020 and 21. One of my main worries is that he'd infect me because he didn't protect himself very well. This fear disappeared when the vaccines came, but the fighting remained. The endless destructive arguments about corona dominated our lives and destroyed our otherwise good and even beautiful 22-year relationship. In mid-November, we broke up. Everything seemed destroyed. Then I went through a very self-critical phase as I realized I'd been living entirely focused on corona, that I'd lost sight of what was good. So we tried a reunion, and now we treat each other respectfully. By founding this self-help group, I'd like to offer support for people like me to enter into mutual dialogue. Since there is otherwise no help here, we have to help ourselves. Eugippius comments, it's all there, the narcissism, the relentless fear and hysteria, now totally unmoored from anything actually happening, the emotional self-indulgence, the moral certainty, even towards the end, a glimmer of self-awareness. I couldn't have written a better self-parody if I had tried. Yes, the discussions will continue until morale improves. And moving on, let's go to Alex Berenson and his Substack, which is called Unreported Truths. Alex Berenson is the author of an outstanding book called Pandemia. COVID deaths in Israel have hit an all-time daily high. Remember, Israel was the first country to mass vaccinate with Pfizer's mRNA vaccine. It was the first country to use boosters, the first to offer a fourth shot. About 95% of adults over 50 are vaccinated. About 85% have received a booster. This is the result. And whoop, how can anyone view this chart as evidence of anything except, at best, complete vaccine failure? And at worst, evidence that the mRNA vaccines are interacting with Omicron in a way that is worsening outcomes. Spare me the talk of relative risk ratios. Spare me. The vast majority of the people dying in Israel are vaccinated. Something is very wrong, and the only rational solution at this point is to pull the vaccines and figure out what. We are very, very fortunate that Omicron is less dangerous overall. The next variant may not be. And, oh, yes. Well, I'll get back to this later about the Olympics. Let's take a quick look at the Daily Skeptic. And hang on, just let me scroll down here when this finally loads. Come on, hurry up. And here we go. All right. Half of people deliberately infected with coronavirus did not get sick. Study finds deliberately infected. Oh, researchers inoculated exposed 36 people with SARS-CoV-2 Wuhan strain via nasal droplets in the first COVID-19 challenge trial. Okay. Police interrupt church service to check vaccine passports and face masks. Oh, this is in West Australia. A photo emerged appearing to show officers conducting COVID-19 compliance checks in the middle of a Catholic mass at a Perth church. Yes, these goons with their checked baseball caps and neon yellow vests. 77% rise in children and needing mental health treatment. Evidence of increased infection risk following a third dose exacerbated by vaccination drive during Omicron wave, UK HSA data show. And let's see. Oh, Mark Zuckerberg's value, net worth continues to plummet. And Stephen Colbert was cheering this because, you see, the problem with Facebook is that it doesn't cancel enough people. A very interesting piece in American Mind by Glenn Elmers and Josiah Lippincott called Boomers Meet the Base. There's a generation gap on the right, and it's hurting us. Divide and conquer is the guiding strategy of the woke oligarchy. The regime is trying to marginalize red America as illegitimate, to separate us from the mainstream, and thus declare us undeserving of the rights and privileges of citizenship. But beyond that, the woke regime is also exploiting a generation gap on the right, which is partly but not wholly a factor of age, through doublespeak and mixed messages. Contrary to some prejudices among the younger right, not every self-identified conservative over 50 is deluded and useless. Likewise, older conservatives need to know that not every young right-wing provocateur on Twitter is a racist anarchist, but a lot of people on either side see each other that way, largely because the regime's vast propaganda machine is able to reinforce both of these prejudices. It's hard to know whether this multi-pronged media campaign by the left is a carefully planned psyops strategy or just the net effect of simultaneously asserting contradictory arguments depending on whatever seems expedient. Either way, a generation gap on the right is being exacerbated, in part because each side is reacting to the blue regime's propaganda. Young people get almost all their news online, which gives them a broad array of information sources and makes them far less likely to accept any so-called official narratives. At times, they may almost be too skeptical, embracing odd and outlandish theories simply because they are outside the mainstream. Insisting that the sky is pink just because Ibram X. Kendi says it is blue is not a sign of independent thinking. Americans over 50 tend to be less active on social media, less frequent consumers of alternative news sites, and more dependent on the legacy media of newspapers and television networks. Of course, many older conservatives know that the establishment media is heavily skewed to the left, yet the publications they turn to correct this balance are, let us say, rather tame and conventional. That would be the Wall Street Journal and National Review. As far as the younger dissident right is concerned, most old-line conservative publications are part of the same corrupt media establishment. When a clear case of left-wing excess does leak into the mainstream news about critical race theory being taught in schools, for example, the legacy media will quickly offer an authoritative source to deny or downplay the revelations. This tactic works up to a point for those with more limited access to alternative news sources, but it only hardens the disgust and skepticism of those who are mostly online, who quickly learn about the dishonesty and hypocrisy of such denials. Let's clear up a few of the most common questions or suspicions older conservatives have about the so-called dissident right. Do you hate America and want it to fail? A lot of young right-wingers will say yes, in a certain sense they do, and they have reasons for saying that. What young man with any sense wants to die for the Joe Biden regime in the Ukraine? Who wants to pay taxes so Kamala Harris can shower money on illegal immigrants and left-wing shock troops? That's a hard message to hear for anyone who lived through the 1960s and the Cold War. For a long time, to be on the right, to defend liberty and morality and decency meant to be a patriot and to love America, and it still does. But the enemies of freedom and decency who hate America are no longer godless communists abroad. They are the godless leftists at home who are currently in power. If America means transgender rights and suffocating biomedical security measures, then those who love freedom will come to hate America, or to be more specific, the current regime that is taking control of what used to be America. Young people on the right don't hate liberty and morality and decency. They despise woke ideology. What's with all the vulgar humor and symbolism? Young men full of spirit and life don't want to be screeched at by the shamans and witches of the ruling class. The authoritative piety of our time, anti-racism, reeks of the worst excesses of cultish fanaticism. The young men of the right can't help but mock these mindless dogmatists. A school marmish concerned with civility, feelings, and hateful rhetoric will never convince young men to abandon a life of freedom in thought and action. Political correctness about race and ethnicity smacks of self-righteousness and hypocrisy. The idea that the KKK or the American Nazi Party are a major threat to anyone today is rightly seen as hysterical nonsense. What's with the weird obsession with weightlifting, aesthetics, physiognomy, etc.? That the body and the mind are connected is a radical statement in a world where a man can claim to be a woman because his spirit is actually female. The body reveals the soul. The youth movement on the right has turned toward self overcoming and a love of beauty and physical improvement to spite the left wing despisers of the body. Why are you so angry? The youth movement on the right has watched for years as the boomers let the country collapse around them. Unrestricted immigration has unmoored traditional happy communities. Stagnant wages and skyrocketing home prices have made family formation economically difficult. Divorce law and feminist hectoring have undercut traditional long-term marriages. A generation of young men, especially young and talented white men from the middle class, find themselves denied access to the institutions of power. They're too privileged, but are still expected to hitch themselves to the plow of economic productivity and keep the regime functioning. More and more of these young men are checking out. What the base need to know about the boomers? Why are you so complacent? Well, the older generation doesn't see itself as complacent, of course. The young are correct to despise clown world, but boomers see them as petulant and self-pitying when they insist that the United States today is worse in every possible way compared to anything that has ever existed. That's melodramatic and unhelpful. And the boomers aren't, in fact, complacent. Walk into any county Republican Party meeting, and it will be filled with high energy members of the 65 and up crowd eager to save their country. The problem for the young is their focus. Boomers still believe in the institutions they grew up with. Many believe if we only pass a balanced budget amendment and term limits or hold an Article 5 constitutional convention, the nation's problems can be solved. They don't seem to appreciate fully how the left has dramatically transformed the country in their lifetimes. And that's a small part of an essay called Boomers Meet the Base by Glenn Elmers and Josiah Lippincott, which you can find at the American Mind or AmericanMind.org. And, well, yes, the new differences between left and right. KMG show favorite, Mary Harrington, weighs in on this in a piece at unheard.com. Why the left eat junk. Resisting big business is the preserve of the right. Back in the 90s, reading food packets for junk ingredients was a typical left-wing hobby. It was a fairly safe bet that if you had opinions on pesticides and farming, preferred unrefined or unprocessed foodstuffs, or questioned the benefits of pasteurization or conventional medicine, you'd have broadly progressive views. Now, though, many of the opinions that were held by the left-leaning devotees of mung beans and carob in my youth have become the preserve of the right, and especially of its weirder online subcultures. Here, enthusiasm for raw milk and animal protein, especially for some reason raw eggs, join in aversion to touching shop receipts and views such as feminism has harmed men and is actively anti-civilization, and democracy is fake, as well as a range of even more pungent anti-progressive talking points. Perhaps the two food chain talking points that recur most frequently and vehemently, though, are hostility to soy, which has become a metonym for emasculation due to its rumored feminizing content, and to seed oils, such as canola, palm, and sunflower oils. Yes, this is very interesting because, as Mary Harrington points out, the medical community, the scientific experts, lied to us about fat for, half a century or so? You gotta stop using the fat that people have used like since forever. And we have these new kinds of fats for you, which are much, much better for you. And they turned out to be much, much worse. And of course, fat is bad for you. No, fat is actually good for you because fat is the substance, as Dennis Mangan pointed out. It tells your body that you're full and that you don't want any more food. So, Apparently, people can be grossly obese and still be fit, and people, women can be single and still be happy. Well, of course they can. But there is a new book out by a woman called Aimee Lutkin, which the Times of London gave her space for an editorial promoting her book. And I'm reminded once again of my insight that the personal is not only the political, it has now become the sociological as well. Aimee writes, in 2016, I had a minor experience at a dinner party that became a major life-changing event. I was 32 years old and I was single. My friends, in a friendly way, asked me that night, so what's going on with your love life? Nothing had been going on for quite some time, and I was pretty sure nothing would ever get going again. I voiced my deep suspicion that I might end up being alone forever. But their reaction quickly grew beyond annoyance. At that dinner party in New York, my friends argued with me. They insisted that I would eventually meet someone because everyone does. They were trying to be encouraging. I think there is this idea that everyone finds someone eventually, I replied, my voice shaking from saying something I often thought but never articulated. Logically, I just don't see how that could be true. Being single for years at a time, even an entire life, is not that strange at all. Across the world, the balance of married to unmarried has shifted significantly. The 2010 US Census indicated that for the first time in its history, there were more single women than married in the United States. Of course, this includes children as well. In that moment of confession, when I thought I would be alone forever, I didn't want pity or reassurances. I just wanted that to be an acceptable way to exist on this planet. To exist on this planet. Rather dramatic, wouldn't you say? Histrionic, even. Unfortunately, people have a negative reaction to the idea that love isn't an inevitable destiny. The thing about leaving the dating scene in your mid 20s and then scrambling to find a toehold there in your 30s is there is arrested development. Not engaging with or dating for love has so long left me a bit immature about some things, a bit naive in some ways. The pain of rejection is not something you feel when you don't put yourself in a position to be rejected, and lots of lonely people rightly avoid that sting. It's much sharper when you've been craving acceptance for so long. Common advice for the brokenhearted is to work on yourself or love yourself, and that advice has been manipulated by capitalism to mean buy things are constantly optimized for productivity. Make you Could you make yourself a nicer, more agreeable person? That doesn't cost any money at all. Aimee continues that advice does contain a seed of truth, which is that when we focus too much on romantic love, we are losing out on all the many opportunities there are for falling in love with life, with community, and with all the slow, arduous growth it takes to accept yourself. Does it really take slow, arduous growth for a person to accept herself or himself? In recovering from pain, I began to invest more in cultivating an internal life and let go of chasing something external I could never hold on to. Yeah, but the whole point of like the bond between men and women is that the external becomes the internal. A romance is a really magical, wonder part of life, but it's just a small fraction of everything else there is to walk towards. Yeah, but you see, the romance, um, it changes over time with couples, male female couples. Surely she must know this. Her essay is called "At 37, I Might Be Single Forever," and I'm happy with that. Well, there are several pictures, professional pictures of her, this woman. She's an attractive enough redhead. She is, however, as I discovered by going to her website, in the entertainment business, which is not a good place to find a wife. Aimee Lutkin is a writer, director, and performer from New York City, where she was born and raised. She currently lives and works in Los Angeles, but will travel for almost any reason. Aimee is working on her first book, The Lonely Hunter, How Our Search for Love is Broken, for Dial Press. Yeah, okay. Uh, extrapolating from personal experience is almost always a dreadful decision. Another single woman who is single and loving it, loving it, is Brie Larson, who's on a charm offensive, according to twoparagraphs.com. Perhaps because this woman, who not only won an Academy Award for acting, but also top-lined a film which grossed $1.2 billion appears to be one of the most miserable people on earth. And she has what Professor Tosspot says, resting bitch face. I am programmed, as it were, to like Brie Larson because she is an attractive blonde with a good figure. But I do not like Brie Larson, and particularly when that video was it Chris Pratt was interviewing him, and oh, she does her own stunts, and Chris Pratt says something like, "Well, yeah, maybe one day you'll get a reputation like Tom Cruise." Well, I'd like to be remembered for myself, not be compared to Tom Cruise. Well, Tom Cruise is a legend in Hollywood. You are not a legend in Hollywood. To most actors, being compared to Tom Cruise would be considered a compliment, but not to this woman. So what has she done? Well, she's put out a video, and she's sharing the 5 important things she learned in 2021. I want to do better. I guess her PR people have said, everyone hates you. You better work on changing that. This video, which I do not recommend, it's word salad. Okay. She needs to follow her passions without necessarily having a reason to occasionally embracing conflict. I'm a flawed human being as well, but the one thing I would say I feel pretty strongly about is that I really do try and I want to do better. I want to do more. I want to show up. I want to show up and be the best partner and daughter and friend that I can possibly be. Well, good for you, Brie. But apparently, she loves Animal Crossing. Wow, that's a shocker. And apparently, it has changed her life in a profound way. Yes, indeed, it has. But wait, pretty much appearing coincidentally with her charm campaign, we get this. This is from CBR.com. Captain Marvel 2's Brie Larson gets photon blasted by fans for promoting NFTs, or non-fungible tokens. Brie Larson, who plays Carol Danvers in Captain Marvel and the Marvels, got roasted online for supporting and promoting NFTs. Larson recently updated her profile picture on Twitter to an NFT image from Flower Girls, which claims that 20% of its primary and secondary sales profits are donated to various children's charities. However, the overall controversy surrounding non-fungible tokens, including environmental and plagiarism concerns, has fans less than thrilled to see the Carol Danvers actor involved in the crypto level. Of course, I'm sure a lot of people were asking the question, don't you have enough money already? Piece on NFTs from palladiummag.com by Generva Davis, when the stagnation goes virtual. And it was explained to me, or I read several times what NFT means. And I thought, okay, now I know what they mean. This doesn't make any sense, so I promptly forgot it. But apparently, NFTs are a notation in a blockchain that indicates a certain account owns the material hosted at a particular URL. The term NFT has become synonymous with digital art, but the object of an NFT can technically point to anything, an animation, a sound file, or even virtual real estate. Most of the time, NFTs are used to indicate ownership of easily copyable digital assets like JPEG images. Good luck keeping control of a JPEG image. But yeah, there's this question of scarcity. Okay. And things become valuable because they're rare. As Peter Blegvad sings in his beautiful song, Gold. In the metaverse, the story goes, digital ownership will no longer be a novelty. It will simply be ownership. And if our digital lives were actually worth more to us than our physical lives, what? Then why couldn't the market for digital assets someday be as large or larger than the market for physical assets? Hypothetically, you could support an entire NFT economy of digital goods powered by eager metaverse inhabitants looking to improve their social status online. But there is no natural scarcity in the digital world. All the scarcity in this metaverse economy has to be imposed against the nature of the medium at great effort and energy cost. In the physical world, competition exists by necessity. In the metaverse, it exists for its own sake, or maybe for the sake of investors. Apparently, there's an Olympics going on in Beijing. Alex Berenson writes, the Winter Olympics starts today in Beijing. Try not to throw up in your mouth. During the Cold War, the Olympics was problematic, but at least the competition stood for something bigger, a way for Russia and the United States to show their prowess without getting anyone killed. In the generations since, the Games has metastasized into something far worse, an overproduced, synthetic, corrupt, crazily expensive celebration of an entirely hollow globalism paid for by corporate sponsors shilling their brands. No wonder China loves it. China. I'm going to have to write more about China in the coming weeks and months. But let's just say for now that SARS-CoV-2 has both exposed and amplified certain unpleasant facts about it. Of course, the American media fronts this bat guano Olympic cake with a layer of woke falseness. True story. The preferred new phrase in Hollywood is black joy, which apparently means that if the story includes African Americans, and it better, it should be positive redemptive or positively redemptive. I guess the wire is out. These Z-Olympics are to actual sports as an honest investigation of the lab leak theory is to actual science, but with more diaper ads. And so no one should be surprised that the ratings are likely to be low. How low? Brian Stelter low? Okay, that's impossible. But at this point, NBC would probably be happy if ratings got close to an average WWE episode. And again, that's from Alex Berenson at his Substack. Oh, and the word has gone down from Yas Slay Queen Nancy Pelosi. This is from Ryan Saavedra at the Daily Wire. Democrat House Speaker Nancy Pelosi instructed U.S. athletes to not speak out against communist China's human rights abuses during the Winter Olympics. Quote, I would say to our athletes who are there to compete, do not risk incurring the anger of the Chinese government because they are ruthless. I know there's a temptation on the part of some to speak out while they're there. I respect that, but I also worry about what the Chinese government might do to their reputations, to their families, unquote. Oh, so China is going to retaliate against the families of American Olympic athletes. I guess, yeah, that explains why America is so totally invested in China. Then, of course, Russia is the big villain, not China. Pelosi encouraged the athletes to be safe, and there's no better way than to be safe than to suck up to China, because you don't want to get on the wrong side of those people. You remember when we were told that the apostles of capitalism told us that we don't need to worry about democracy in China or just something less than dictatorship. Just introduce capitalism in there. Get the WTO in there, and everything will turn out fine. And guess what? Things got worse. There's a piece in the Daily Mail, an editorial piece about the Olympics by Nick Jones and Nick Faga, the most shameful Olympics since Hitler's. Now, you may have heard, and this is a widespread myth, that, that Hitler was furious at the 36 Olympics. He was so furious, which were in Berlin, that he foamed at the mouth and chewed some carpets. No. The 1936 Olympics were a spectacular propaganda victory for the Nazis. Spectacular. In the 1932 Olympics, the Germans did not do very well at all. In the 1936 Olympics, they won easily ahead of the United States and every other country. There's a very good book about the 36 Olympics, which I highly recommend, called Hitler's Games. And yes, Jesse Owens, he showed Hitler what's what. You can't win every race. It's not possible. William Briggs has a piece checking on the progress of the anti-white jihad. He is, of course, the statistician to the stars, and you can find him at wmbriggs.com. They had Biden announce he is seeking a black woman to replace Breyer on the so-called Supreme Court. Indeed, one source said they had already had 11 candidates lined up. The best part of this comes later when we point out that this black woman got her job because she's a black woman, and we will be called racist. All this has already happened in a way. Georgetown law professor Ilya Shapiro said the ordering they will use would lead, as indeed it will, to a lesser black woman being elevated to the court's position. The students of color other than white at Georgetown heard this. Perhaps they are all women or men pretending to be women, because they immediately demanded, spit your drink out now, to be given a designated place on campus to cry. They also demanded to be able to skip class and class requirements, and demanded that their missing work should be part of a reparations package. And why not? It's not like they will need legal training if the spoils are being divvied up because of tribal affiliation. And they are now, by rigid enforced contract in Hollywood. David Cole has been tracking Hollywood diversity and perversity quotas. It's no longer something loose and negotiable. Quotas are in print and in force. And let's look at the cast of Amazon's upcoming Lord of the Rings. Are there any white people in this show? Any? Doesn't look like it. Given that any form of diversity and perversity quota hiring necessarily lowers standards and quality for the many reasons we discussed before, we can look forward to ever more worse movies and entertainment. For the real kicker, even more idiotic Supreme Court decisions. In our suffering, at least we won't have to look at so many white faces. Oh, yes, Derek Utley tweets, the New York City mayor referred to white people as crackers. Instagram took down the video within 20 minutes, calling it hate speech. The public should be able to access this type of communication so they can make informed voting decisions. Stop this censoring. Yeah, and what is happening in Hollywood now? CBO Barry Weiss invited anecdotes about the anti-white studio jihad, and she reminded us that no Oscars will henceforth be given unless a film is woke. Hard quotas are instituted. The minimum aspirational goals for casting actors across speaking roles are 30% white men, 30% white women, and binary people. Men are men, but trans, also called Gorsuches, count as women. CBS mandated that writers' rooms be at least 40% Black, Indigenous, and people of color, or BIPOC, for the 2021-2022 broadcast season, and 50% for the 2022 to 2023 season. ABC Entertainment issued a detailed series of inclusion standards. I guarantee you every studio has something like that, a longtime writer and director said. Now they'll just say, sorry, diversity quotas, we're not allowed to hire you, said a 48-year-old white male comedy writer who was recently dropped by his agent. Zach Stentz, a writer and producer who is a screenwriter and agent Cody Banks in the Marvel movie Thor, said a really toxic thing that does happen is that agents will tell their clients, especially white clients, when they don't get a job, oh yeah, it's because they had to hire a minority writer. Even if it's true, it's not a helpful thing to say. Well, I guess this is just going to hasten the death of television. Did you know that there is a documentary on ABC, which apparently is still a network, about Emmett Till? Actually, it's about Emmett Till's mother. It's a 6-part series. Yeah, 6-part. Emmett Till was murdered in 1955, and as Steve Saylor has pointed out, the further we get away from Emmett Till, the more important he becomes. Is he, one of America's founding fathers by now? I'm sure you all know the story. He was a 14-year-old from Chicago who was visiting rural Mississippi. It was claimed that he went into a store and made lewd comments to a married woman, whereupon he was abducted and tortured and horribly murdered. I don't think no one is doubting that. It's a horrific crime, no question. But it was a long time ago. Here's a crime rather more contemporary that you don't hear much about. I'm reading from Wikipedia. Shannon Gale Christian, age 21, and Hugh Christopher Newsom Jr., age 23, were from Knoxville, Tennessee. They were kidnapped on the evening of January 6, 2007, when Christian's vehicle was carjacked. The couple was taken to a rental house. Both of them were raped, tortured, and murdered. 4 males and 1 female were arrested, charged, and convicted in the case. Certainly, just as horrific, or even more horrific, perhaps, than the Emmett Till story. Nicholas Stix had a piece in VDare 5 years ago, 10 years after the Knoxville horror, a tale of Black atrocity, MSM lies, justice system failure, and parental agony. The mainstream media is working very hard right now to send down the memory hole the abduction and days-long torture of an 18-year-old disabled white man by 4 blacks, including one he pathetically thought was his friend, who incredibly live-streamed the atrocity on Facebook. Not coincidentally, there seems to be no national media coverage of this weekend's 10th anniversary of an earlier stellar moment in American race relations and MSN malfeasance, what I have called the Knoxville horror. The kidnap, gang rape, torture murders in Knoxville by yet another black gang. Yeah. The plain fact is that no one should be shocked, Nicholas Dix writes. These black and white atrocities are just a fact of life in today's America. Chicago is just a minor one. There was an eerily similar black and white abduction, gang rape, murder in Wichita, Kansas, 17 years ago. Does anyone remember the Piercy massacre, etc., etc.? I'm not going to get into any more details about this because it is simply too disgusting. Absolutely too disgusting. But, oh, yes, let's talk about lynching. When did lynching end in the United States? Oh, black people are all terrified of rope in a circle. They were not terrified previously, but increasingly they are, because the media and black leaders tell black Americans that all white people want to hang them. I suppose I could say that's grossly irresponsible, but it's a useful thing to do because it enshrines a falsehood, deliberate falsehood, the falsehood that black people are afraid of white people and not vice versa. And it is very much the vice versa that is the norm. I see Ava DuVernay. Yes, she is a black impresario, a filmmaker. Oh, she made a film on Selma. And how long ago did that happen now? And, oh, yes, a 2019 American crime drama, When They See Us, which is based on a totally, completely bogus version of the 1989 Central Park jogger case. I don't know if you're familiar with that. A white woman was beaten and raped, gang raped, and a bunch of people were arrested and convicted. And then other people came forward and said, no, it wasn't them, it was us. This was a gang rape. It is unknown exactly how many people took part in it. But guess what? The rapist got a big payoff because we can't have people thinking about, the prospect of a white woman being knocked down and beaten and raped in Central Park. That, not good for the narrative. I'm going to move to the book club. I'm running a little late today. I'm going to move to the book club shortly. But let's have a look at the chat before I do that. John S. says Till's father was executed by the military for raping and murdering women in Italy. It was during World War II. Yes, yes, this is true. This is true. This was kept from the narrative for quite some time. Ed McNeck says the hi-fi murders were almost as revolting. Ed McNeck says half of those rapists admitted to it before they even questioned about it. Totally ridiculous that they are worshipped now. Okay. Favorite television shows? Near the Edge, bra, says Don Willis. I don't know. The perennial Emmett Till issue, says Dr. Dead Name. LOL, prepare for your favorite television shows to suck. I've noticed a genre. I don't watch these shows, but, I catch bits of them or I see the promos, and it's like a black milieu, but there are black people involved, white people involved in it or on the periphery or whatever. And every single one of these sitcoms, the black people are noble, wise, and calm and reasonable, whereas the white people are idiots. Every single one. It's like that the Gillette, are you the best you can be? And you've all seen the image, right? There's this pretty girl walking down the street, a pretty white woman, and this black guy, this young white guy, he's about to he's lunging as if he wants to talk to her, and we can't have that because that would be an act, pretty evil act, patriarchal at best, perhaps almost rape at worst. And so there's the sensible black man holding him back. Okay. Palcasso88 says David Cole has lately been on fire at Ataki Mag. RJ67 says, I call that the Doris Kearns Goodwin NPR PBS version of American history. Nothing else happened except their approved version of what happened. Ogan's Iron says, I went through a phase during my 20s when I was specifically seeking out women's views on various topics. How ridiculous I was. LOL. Hello to Tricky Who. Did Kevin get a new chair? Oscar to us. No, it's the same chair. It's the same green leather chair, or fake leather. Okay. Everything is going to be virtual. I'd be surprised if there are still skydivers in 10 years, says Head McNeck. The recent events, RJ67 says, the recent events re Joe Rogan and Spotify are enough validation of Kevin's views on physical versus streaming media. Paying a subscription to be denied music of your choice, no problem. Urban Planner, hello, says 4chan is experiencing a everything is fake psyop to distract from any meaningful debate. Want to talk about nuclear policy? Nuclear weapons are fake. I like it because it leads these schizos away. Critical Drinker is great, says Palcasso88. Yes, I just love his line talking about Star Trek Discovery, about the captain, who he calls diverse female space Jesus. Okay, so let's move on to the book club. And this is a book by Christopher Lasch, and it is called The Revolt of the Elites and the Betrayal of Democracy, published in 1994 by Norton. Now, Christopher Lasch, who was born in 1932 and died in 1994, was a man of the left. That is to say, the non-communist left. Of course, leftism was once not associated with or not coterminous with a hatred of family, community, tradition, society, the working class. I could go on and on and on. I suppose it's possible that one could say that Lasch moved to the right during his lifetime, or was even radicalized by the change in viewpoint among the progressives. I suppose one could say that. His father was a Rhodes Scholar, I see, who won a Pulitzer Prize. Rhodes Scholars are now, almost without exception, have been for decades, shits. And, if you see someone is a Rhodes Scholar, don't listen to anything they have to say and avoid their company. Lasch went to Harvard, so in one way he's a member of the elite. But I suppose people who are within the elite are best placed to criticize it. I see that one of Lasch's graduate students was Eugene Genovese, who he certainly went from left to right. He died in 2012. In his later years, he became very amusing indeed. I mean, just pointing out just how ridiculous the left had become. I suppose what distinguishes Lasch from so many of his, rivals in the field of, let's say, sociology, is that Lasch was a thinker. He didn't merely parrot jargon. And that's what we hear now. Oh, yes, speaking of racialized people, or as a racialized person, what does that mean? What possible meaning could that term have, particularly in a world where race is a social construct? What could it mean? Oh, no, but you see, white people believe in races, and they believe that they are a race. So they come up with other phony races in order to keep non-white people down. No, but you were exulting in your race. You're exulting in being Black or Asian or BIPOC or whatever. So, but none of it makes sense, but it doesn't matter that it doesn't make sense. Lasch begins with a consideration of the question of whether democracy can survive, or indeed whether it deserves to survive. Of course, a lot of people are talking about that now, but Lasch was one of the first. The introduction to his book is called The Democratic Malaise. Most of my recent work comes back in one way or another, the question of whether democracy has a future. I think a great many people are asking themselves the same question. Americans are much less sanguine about the future than they used to be, and with good reason. The decline of manufacturing and the consequent loss of jobs, the shrinking of the middle class, the growing number of the poor, the rising crime rate, the flourishing traffic in drugs, the decay of the cities, the bad news goes on and on and on. No one has a plausible solution to these intractable problems, and most of what passes for political discussion doesn't even address them. Well, it's interesting, as I say, that much has changed in America since Lasch wrote this book, again published in 1994. And these problems, they're not a problem. Homelessness, what are you talking about? Oh, but when Reagan was president, that was the number one problem. You've seen what it looks like in Los Angeles and San Francisco and other places now. Oh, that's just media exaggeration. It is. It's a right-wing conspiracy theory. It is. Oh, drugs are good, and all drugs are good, and the government should give people drugs. Yeah, but they're killing themselves and they're wrecking the cities. Oh, that is just your patriarchal notions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There is no. I will say one thing about the neoconservatives. I mean, the early neoconservatives, before neoconservatism became strictly about Israel, that the neoconservatives, Irving Kristol and Daniel Bell and others, were concerned about deteriorating conditions in the cities, and they sought solutions to them. But now what we hear is that, one, it's not happening, and two, but it's a good thing that it is. Exactly. Now, much of the book, or the early book, is he turns Jose Ortega y Gasset's The Revolt of the Masses on its head. That the charges that Ortega y Gasset makes against a mass man are, more importantly, they are the problems of the elite. That the elite has removed itself from common life. That the elite, as Lasch makes clear, and he wrote this, I don't know, around the same time as Pat Buchanan, who is coming at this question from the right, that the elite feels loyalty only to the elite. The elite feels no loyalty to their communities, to their countries. And in fact, they are mobile. They are ever, ever mobile. And yes, he writes, the conflict between town and country exploited by nativist demagogues who depicted the city as a sink of iniquity was largely illusory. The best minds have always understood that town and country are complementary and that a healthy balance between them is an important precondition of the good society. It was only when the city became a megalopolis after World War II that this balance broke down. The very distinction between town and country became meaningless when the dominant form of settlement was no longer urban or rural, much less a synthesis of the two, but a sprawling, amorphous conglomeration without clearly identifiable boundaries, public space, or civic identity. Robert Fishman has argued persuasively that the new pattern can no longer be adequately described as even suburban, since the suburb, formerly a residential annex of the city, has now taken over most of its functions. Cities retain a residual importance as the home of large law firms, advertising agencies, publishing companies, entertainment enterprises, and museums, but the middle-class neighborhoods that sustained a vigorous civic culture are rapidly disappearing. Mere remnants, our cities are increasingly polarized. Upper middle-class professionals, together with the service workers who cater to their needs, maintain a precarious hold on the high-rent districts and barricade themselves against the poverty and crime threatening to engulf them. American journalism is shaped by somewhat similar reservations about the reasoning powers of ordinary men and women, according to Walter Lippmann. Walter Lippmann, giant of American journalism, giant of American thought. If you've ever read Walter Lippmann and you know of his reputation, oh my God, he is so boring. He doesn't seem to have any insights at all. And his biases, his class bias, I'm smart and you're not, I am a member of the elite and you are not. They're so naked. Public opinion, Lippmann argued in opposition to John Dewey and other veterans of the progressive movement, was a weak read. It was shaped more by emotion than reasoned judgment. Yes, because the progressives are, their thinking is definitely dominated by reasoned judgment and not emotion. The very concept of a public was suspect. Yes, indeed. Lippmann's argument rested on a sharp distinction between opinion and, wait for it, science. Only the latter, he thought, could claim to be objective. Opinion, on the other hand, rested on vague impressions, prejudices, and wishful thinking. The cult of professionalism had a decisive influence on the development of modern journalism. Newspapers might have served as extensions of the town meeting. Now they embraced a misguided ideal of objectivity and defined their goal as the circulation of reliable information, the kind of information, that is, that tends not to promote debate but to circumvent it. The most curious feature in all this, of course, is that although Americans are now drowning in information, thanks to television and newspapers and other media, this was before the internet, of course, studies regularly report a steady decline in their knowledge of public affairs. In the age of information, the American people are notoriously ill-informed. The explanation of the seeming paradox is obvious, though seldom offered. Having been effectively excluded from public debate on the grounds of their incompetence, most Americans no longer have any use for the information inflicted on them in such large amounts. They have become almost as incompetent as their critics have always claimed. Well, yes, progressives in the past they claimed to love the working class. Well, there's no question now that progressives hate the working class, and they have moved assiduously to destroy it. Oh, it's inefficient for us to make things in the United States or Canada or in Britain. We'll make them cheaper elsewhere. Oh, but what about the people who are left behind? Oh, they'll get other jobs. In what? The information economy. A lot of jobs for high school educated people in the information economy. Oh, well, all of the service jobs. Do you know how many people are in front of you in line to get a job as a barista at Starbucks? Christopher Lasch has some very amusing things to say about Robert Rubin, who is somewhat of a guru figure for reasons which have always escaped me. Oh, sorry, I'm confusing Rubin and Reich. It's a common mistake, and I apologize for it. Yes, he writes, Robert Reich's category of symbolic analyst serves, apart from its syntactical incoherence, as a useful empirical and rather unpretentious description of the new class. These are people, as Reich describes them, who live in a world of abstract concepts and symbols, ranging from stock market quotations to the visual images produced by Hollywood and Madison Avenue, and who specialize in the interpretation and deployment of symbolic information. Reich contrasts them with the two other principal categories of labor: routine production workers, who perform repetitive tasks and exercise little control over the design of production, and in-person servers, whose work also consists of routine for the most part, but must be provided person to person, and therefore cannot be sold worldwide. If we allow for the highly schematic and necessarily imprecise character of these categories, they correspond closely enough to everyday observation to give us a fairly accurate impression not only of the occupational structure, but of the class structure of American society, since the symbolic analysts are clearly rising while the other categories, which make up 80% of the population, are declining in wealth and status. A more serious objection than imprecision is Reich's extravagantly flattering portrait of the symbolic analysts. In his eyes, they represent the best and brightest in American life, educated at elite private schools and high-quality suburban schools where they are tracked through advanced courses. They enjoy every advantage their doting parents can provide. Quote, their teachers and professors are attentive to their academic needs. They have access to state-of-the-art scientific laboratories, interactive computers and video systems in the classroom, language laboratories, and high-tech school libraries. Their classes are relatively small. Their peers are intellectually stimulating. Their parents take them to museums and cultural events, expose them to foreign travel, and give them music lessons. At home are educational books, educational toys, educational videotapes, microscopes, telescopes, and personal computers replete with the latest educational software, unquote. Lasch comments, these privileged young people acquire advanced degrees at the best universities in the world, the superiority of which is proved by their ability to attract foreign students in great numbers. In this cosmopolitan atmosphere, they overcome the provincial folkways that impede creative thought, according to Reich. Skeptical, curious, creative, they become problem solvers par excellence, equal to any challenge. Unlike those who engage in mind numbing routines, they love their work, which engages them in lifelong learning and endless experimentation. Unlike old fashioned intellectuals who tend to work by themselves and to be jealous and possessive about their ideas, the new brain workers, producers of high quality insights in a variety of fields, ranging from marketing and finance to art and entertainment, operate best in teams. Their capacity to collaborate promotes system thinking, the ability to see problems in their totality, to absorb the fruits of collective experimentation, and to discern larger causes, consequences, and relationships. Since their work depends so heavily on networking, they settle in specialized geographical pockets populated by people like them. These privileged communities, Cambridge, Silicon Valley, Hollywood, become wondrously resilient centers of artistic, technical, and promotional enterprise. They represent the epitome of intellectual achievement in Reich's admiring view, and of the good life, conceived as the exchange of insights, information, and professional gossip. The geographical concentration of knowledge producers, once it reaches a critical mass, incidentally provides a market for the growing class of in person servers who cater to their needs. Yes. And he writes, uh, quote, it is no accident that Hollywood is home to a conspicuously large number of voice coaches, of fencing trainers, dancing instructors, performers agents, and suppliers of photographic, acoustic, and lighting equipment. Also found in close proximity are restaurants with precisely the right ambiance, favored by producers, wooing directors and directors, wooing screenwriters, and everyone in Hollywood, wooing everyone else, unquote. Lasch comments, universal admission to the class of creative people would best meet Reich's ideal of a democratic society. But since this goal is clearly unattainable, the next best thing, presumably, is society composed of symbolic analysts and their hangers on. Reich is not happy with the modern form of education, particularly tendency to pull the so-called best and the brightest from the working class and let them join the elite, because you want to put those rude people behind you. The working class, the lower orders, they don't need smart people. So we're just going to, cream the top, cream the top. He writes here, in a closely related essay written the previous year, ignored by historians who admire the laboring classes but miss the direction of Oreste Brownson's argument, he pointed out that Horace Mann's educational reforms, far from democratizing intelligence, would create a modern form of priesthood by setting up an educational establishment empowered to impose the opinions now dominant on the common schools. How prescient he was. Brownson maintained we may as well have a religion established by law as a system of education that would serve, like all priestly hierarchies, merely as the most effectual means possible of checking pauperism and crime and making the rich secure in their possessions. The old priestly office having been abolished, Mann and his allies aimed to revive it, in effect, by promoting the school at the expense of the press, the lyceum, and other agencies of popular education. By giving the school system exclusive control over education, Mann's reforms encouraged a division of cultural labor that would weaken people's capacity to educate themselves. The teaching function would be concentrated in a class of professional specialists, whereas it ought to be diffused throughout the whole community. An educational establishment was just as dangerous as a priestly or military establishment. Its advocates had forgotten that children were best, quote, educated in the streets by the influence of their associates, by the passions and affections they see manifested, the conversations to which they listen, and above all by the general pursuits, habits, and moral tone of the community, unquote. In 1841, Brownson returned to this theme in an essay that made his underlying concerns even more explicit. The mission of this country, he argued, was to raise up the laboring classes and make every man really free and independent. That objective was completely inconsistent with the division of society into working men and idlers, employers and operatives, a learned class and an unlearned, a cultivated class and an uncultivated, a refined class and a vulgar. Lasch takes up the Horatio Alger myth and concludes, I think correctly, that it was a way to inure the working classes to their fate of being paid almost nothing and being brutalized and injured at work and being told that your lack of success is due to the fact, not because of your class, but because you simply haven't worked hard enough. Now, Lasch is particularly angry with the notion that the working class is just, it's a sink. Oh, maybe we can find some useful individuals who will help the elite rule, but the rest of them, ugh. Education is wasted on these people. They have no interest in education, which is very amusing because, of course, the school as we understand it is how old? 150 years old? No more than that. Somehow, Andrew Carnegie uh, managed to become the richest man in America with what, 2, 3 years of schooling? Or one could look at Edison. Similarly, Lasch is very fond of the American tradition of tinkering, which led, of course, to the Wright brothers, Edison, and I suppose even to Silicon Valley in its early days, that engineers are clever people. And engineers don't need the patina of approval by the elite. Lasch is similarly, well, more than wary of meritocracy. That meritocracy, in Lasch's view, is entirely self-serving. How do you know that the best and the brightest, or that the elite constitutes the best and the brightest? Well, because those are the people who got to the top. He writes, a meritocracy has no use for chivalry and valor than a hereditary aristocracy has for brains. Although hereditary advantages play an important part in the attainment of professional or managerial status, the new class has to maintain the fiction that its power rests on intelligence alone. Hence, it has little ancestral gratitude or of an obligation to live up to responsibilities inherited from the past. To think of itself as a self-made elite, owing its privileges exclusively to its own efforts. Even the concept of a republic of letters, which might be expected to appeal to elites with such a large stake in higher education, is almost entirely absent from their frame of reference. Meritocratic elites find it difficult to imagine a community, even a community of the intellect, that reaches into both the past and the future and is constituted by an awareness of intergenerational obligation. The zones and networks admired by Reich bear little resemblance to communities in any traditional sense of the term. Populated by transients, they lack the continuity that derives from a sense of place and from standards of conduct self-consciously cultivated and handed down from generation to generation. The community of the best and brightest is a community of contemporaries in the double sense that its members think of themselves as agelessly youthful, and that the mark of this youthfulness is precisely their ability to stay on top of the latest trends. Ortega and other critics describe mass culture as a combination of radical ingratitude with an unquestioned belief in limitless possibility. The mass man, according to Ortega, took for granted the benefits conferred by civilization and demanded them peremptorily, as if they were natural rights. Heir of all the ages, he was blissfully unconscious of his debt to the past. Though he enjoyed advantages brought about by the general rise in the historic level, he felt no obligation either to his progenitors or to his progeny. He recognized no authority outside himself, conducting himself as if he were lord of his own existence. His incredible ignorance of history made it possible for him to think of the present moment as far superior to the civilizations of the past, and to forget, moreover, that contemporary civilization was itself the product of centuries of historical development, not the unique achievement of an age that discovered the secret of progress by turning its back on the past. These habits of mind, it would seem, are more accurately associated with the rise of meritocracy than with the revolt of the masses. Ortega himself admitted that the prototype of the mass man was the man of science. the technician, the specialist, the learned ignoramus, whose mastery of his own tiny corner of the universe was matched only by his ignorance of the rest. But the process in question does not derive simply from the replacement of the old-fashioned man of letters by the specialist, as Ortega's analysis implies. It derives from the intrinsic structure of meritocracy itself. Meritocracy is a parody of democracy. It offers opportunities for advancement, in theory at least, to anyone with the talent to seize them, but opportunities to rise, as R.H. Tawney points out in Equality, are no substitute for a general diffusion of the means of civilization, of the dignity and culture that are needed by all, whether they rise or not. Social mobility does not undermine the influence of elites. If anything, it helps to solidify their influence by supporting the illusion that it rests solely on merit. Lasch thinks dimly of this idea of social mobility because, once again, let's destroy community by taking the so-called best and brightest, or those people best at earning certificates, and take them from where they come from and send them to New York or Washington or Boston or San Francisco or wherever. That social mobility, of course, we now know that it's become pretty much a myth. Social mobility is now used in place of the idea, even of the dignity of labor, or the idea that culture belongs to everyone, which it does. I should note that since Lasch died, there is no longer any illusion that public schools exist to impart knowledge. No, they exist to impart improved opinions. And not that long ago, certainly I would say up to the 1950s, it was understood that culture belonged to everyone, which is why you have, references, to say, Franz Liszt and others in Warner Brothers cartoons. That in fact the elite has now decided that rap music, that's what Black people need. That's their level. They couldn't possibly appreciate anything better than that. And of course, what you, Beethoven, whatever, no, that's not for you. You don't come from the right class. That all of the barriers, or all of the, how would I say, what was left, the detritus of a feeling of obligation that the elite owed to the lower orders is long gone now. Long gone. And if, Black culture has largely, to give one example, has largely collapsed, well, that's a good thing. Because, this was based on various Western notions of superiority, et cetera, et cetera. And it's of course, it's very amusing, and Lasch's analysis mirrors that of Pat Buchanan, that what has come to be seen as inevitable, ineluctable, historic in a, neo-Marxist sense, it's so very convenient that this all works out so well for the elite. Is it not? Funny how that works, eh? And just the arrogance of these people, that they consider themselves, and you can get this now in full flavor. They consider themselves to be as gods. The fact, as I was speaking at the beginning of the show, that everything that these pundits say about politics, about society, about the economy, it's wrong, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all, because they are the elite, and they got to be the elite because they're the best and the brightest. Of course, this is entirely tautological, but never mind. Lasch writes, even if we can't agree on the definition of a good life, and it could be argued we have not yet seriously made the effort, we can surely agree on minimal standards of workmanship, literacy, and general competence. Without these, we have no basis on which either to demand respect or to grant it. Common standards are absolutely indispensable to a democratic society. Societies organized around a hierarchy of privilege can afford multiple standards, but a democracy cannot. Double standards mean second-class citizenship. And indeed, when you hear from teachers, from principals, from school boards, oh, we have all of these students who don't know how to read at the age of grade 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever. Well, the family problems and such like. And, this is not, book learning is not the most important thing in the world. Jerry Pornell used to point out regularly the elite deliberately destroyed America's public schools, so there would be less of they would the people, the lower orders, would be less of a threat to their hegemony. I suppose when Lasch published this book, his idea of the elite replacing Ortega's masses as arrogant, stupid, self-satisfied, etc., 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 would be considered shocking. I don't know that it could be considered shocking now, but I'm just going to wrap up my consideration of this book, and I've really touched on a small part of it. Lasch is one of those critics who I would say one learns more from them than any of the others, certainly those who are more popular than he. Haven in a Heartless World, The Family Besieged, The Culture of Narcissism, American Life in an Age of Diminishing Expectations, The Minimal Self, Psychic Survival in Troubled Times, The True and Only Heaven, Progress and Its a Critic, Women in the Common Life, Love, Marriage, and Feminism. Those are a few of his titles. His stuff is dense. I mean, dense with ideas. It is admirably readable. And this book is a classic, which says more about the way we live now and why we live the way we live now than hardly any other book that I can think of. It has my highest recommendation. A final look at the chat before I wrap it up. Hello to Birkin Seltanoff. Giant Art says, production says, these people now want to go after truckers' insurance. They're evil to the core. Uzbek music. Okay. Uzbek Jewish colony in Queens, New York. Okay. Okay. So anyone interested in my analysis of Christopher Lasch? Trudeau wants to massacre them. He can't wait, says Ogan's Iron. Trudeau seems scared witless. Okay. This is the as they like to say, in political analysis, the optics of this are just horrendous. So supposedly Ottawa is in crisis and the prime minister has fled. How long has he been gone for now? I've lost track of the days. KMG, tell me what you know about a man called Harry Nilsson, said Caligula at 138. Harry Nilsson was an outstanding songwriter and singer. Had one of the greatest ever voices in what's called rock music. Unfortunately, he, in his defense, he had pretty much all his money stolen by a crooked manager. But he, in addition to that, he destroyed his career and actually blew his voice out because of heavy drinking with the likes of John Lennon. I fear a Tiananmen Square situation, says Birkenseltanoff. No, the will does not exist. It doesn't exist. The Zen Master says, I find it weird that these truckers are still deferring to politicians and media as though seeking approval is a very strange dynamic, morally bankrupt people ruling over the God-fearing, decent folk. Well, no, we've seen many examples of journalists for Global News, aka the CSIS News Network, almost bursting into tears. They don't want to talk to us. They're so rude to us. Why would they want to talk to them? It makes no sense. They hate them. And you just have to read their stories. You just have to read their stories to realize how much they hate them. And what this comes down to is, how dare these nobodies protest their oppression? Lasch's book of essays had a review that led me to reading Jacques Ellul's Propaganda, which was my big red pill. Yeah, I should get around to Jacques Ellul. There's a lot of great stuff there. Well, thank you for your kind words, Teleologic Jones. Halper says, I got a lot of reading The Culture of Narcissism in today's book many years ago. You know, I mean, the idea of community now barely exists. Oh, well, who needs communities? We are selfish atoms, looking ceaselessly to maximize our utility. Like that woman in the London Times. I don't need a man, you know. Okay, maybe you don't, but most men do, and most men need a woman. That is the way of nature. It is the way of history. Oh no, we're at ground zero. We don't need any of that stuff. I mean, again, Lasch wrote his works before the internet, and I can only imagine, what he would say about this. I mean, these selfish trends in society existed before the internet. Particularly, I only want to converse, say, with people of my own intellectual level, people of my own intellectual class. And then I don't want to have anything to do with these people. I may, buy something at a grocery store or a pharmacy, and the person behind the counter might start talking to me, and I don't know whether I can handle that. God knows what these people say, what they think. And the elimination of random encounters. Now, of course, if you're only going to consort with people who live as you do and think as you do, what is the effect going to be on your intellectual appreciation of the world? No, but these think that it's a good thing. You don't want to deal with any of the other these other people because you might be contaminated thereby. Okay. The corruption of the best is the worst, according to Ellul from Teleologic Jones. Well, Thomas Aquinas said something similar. He said, when the best go bad, they become the worst. So what's coming up on the show? I can't guarantee that there is going to be a show on Monday because I have 24 days to find a new apartment. And that has become my first priority. On Music Monday, it'll probably be Tuesday or Wednesday, I'm going to be talking about ABBA, a particular favorite of mine. And on Theater Thursday, I'm going to be talking about, working class people. A documentary by Barbara Koppel from 1976 called Harlan County, USA. I thought that I would have a pro-union movie, and the next week, February 17th, I'm going to be discussing a British movie from 1960 by Guy Green called The Angry Silence, which could be construed as an anti-union movie, although that's debatable. And on the book club next Friday, I am going to be discussing a book by Joris Karl Huysman. It's a Dutch name, but he was a Frenchman. It's called Là-bas, or Down There. And it's the second in his trilogy, From Darkness to Light. It's a very dark book indeed, mirroring Huysman's own investigations into the occult demonology. A short advice, don't go there. So, thank you all for tuning in. I really appreciate it. I can't guarantee that I will be on the air Monday, but I will be back next week. And when I'm back, I will be at, my show will be on starting at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you'd like to make a donation to this live stream, my PayPal account is linked to kevin_grace@hotmail.com. And if you're in Canada, donations may be made directly to the live stream via interact@kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this benediction in these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse. I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.